Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ward Colin here, and here's another segment of The Ongoing Race. And here with us today we have Mr. Jim Kleinpeter, who covers LSU sports, NOLA sports, as in the Saints, the Pelicans, for the Times Picayune, correct?
That's correct, and NOLA.com.
And NOLA.com. And how long have you been within those certain jobs and those titles and working within print?
Well, I've been the LSU beat writer for the Times Picayune since 1995, so that's 21 years, and I have been at the Picayune 32 years total. I did 11 years of prep sports, 4 years as the prep editor, and moved on to LSU in 1995.
Okay, and you say 21 years you've worked in that capacity. Over the time you've worked within print journalism, what's the biggest change you've seen within the industry?
Well, it's become a lot more popular, and I find there's a lot more casual fans that have gotten involved. And in fact, I'll cite a personal example. When I was growing up, I was the only person in my family that really cared about sports. Now, all my sisters and my brother and my parents, or my mother anyway, have become sports fans. And I think some of that is due to the internet. It has spread it out and made it so easy to follow teams. I used to listen to a radio broadcast of the Astros. That's how kind of got an interest in sports. But that was all I had, was a radio, because you didn't see much baseball on television. They had one game a week. But the internet has created an explosion in sports interest.
And you mentioned that the internet has given, more so or not, the casual fan more of a voice. How do you think that affects the relationship between the audience and the media as it pertains to your job, or how the audience may perceive someone as yourself, since they might have the tendency to believe that they have more of a knowledge as a casual fan with more freedom, being that they have the internet or other tools?
Yeah, that is a drawback. People don't understand that journalists are trained. The way we do things, the way we look at things, we're trained on how to look at it, how to break it down, how to present it back to the people in a fair and balanced manner. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. Forever, my whole life, I've been asked, "Aren't you happy about that? The way LSU won that game?" Well, no. That's not my job. Is not to be happy or sad. My job is to present it to the fans in a fair and objective manner. I have to put my whatever personal feelings I have for a school or a team or whatever it is I'm covering, because I did cover the Saints for a couple of years. I have to put that aside and tell a balanced story, and so I don't get too high or too low about what goes on. I will say it's easier to cover a team when they win. Everybody's happier and more willing to talk, and then it's asking questions after a team loses that's really hard, especially when a player has had a bad game, made a terrible mistake or something like that. But the changes that I've seen is that people have become more knowledgeable about sports. They understand it better. We're giving them more. I did a film study for several years. I still do it, and breaking down exactly what's going on in the game. People understand the games. People are smarter about sports these days.
And when you talk about research actually shows that sports audiences, they question media personalities, their credibility based on their likability and their trustworthiness. How do you see that playing out, or how has that changed over time?
Well, there are times when there are a lot of different types of journalists in sports media. I'm a beat writer. So what I do is I just go and get the nuts and bolts. I tell people what's going on. I try to get it to them as quickly as I can. I try to get as accurate as I can with the information, and telling all aspects of the story. There are columnists who are paid to give their opinion, and believe me, people say everybody's got an opinion, but not that many people know how to present it in a balanced manner. You have got to be able to look at a game or a player or something that happened, and you need to be educated enough to be able to break it down and tell people why you think what you think. It's not enough to just say what your opinion is. You've got to be able to back it up with fact, and that's what a good columnist can do. Now, a lot of fans, they're a fan of their team, and sometimes they're angry at them, and sometimes they're too happy with them, and they're not going to see the whole picture. They're not going to see a balanced look at their team. They get emotional, and that's what I was talking about earlier when I said trained professional journalists understand that it's not our place to get emotional. We have to be unbiased. We have to be objective and cool-headed when breaking down and telling people what they saw or what they should think about a certain situation.
And when you talk about being balanced and unbiased, do you have any particular practices or things that you do in order to ensure that your work is unbiased or as fair as possible?
Well, the only thing you can really do is know as much about your subject as possible. I think a good example is this LSU controversy that's going on right now. Joe Oliva made the point, and a lot of people overlook this, with all the flooding in Baton Rouge, to take a home game away from LSU is just another cut for the community, because LSU football means more to this community than just about any other industry besides LSU as itself. So you've got to look inside and ask all the questions that you can think of. And that sets up everything for you making a decision about how you're going to go forward and what the most important thing is. Every time I write a story, I want to get the most important thing up at the top of the story. Why am I writing this story? Whatever that answer to that question is has to be at the top of my story, and that's what I'm presenting, and that's what I have to prove. I have to know enough about my subject, and in that respect, I've got to go and talk to people. I've got to talk to people on both sides. I got to talk to Joe Oliva. I got to talk to people on the Florida side to get a fair rendering of what I'm going to say.
And that's more so geared towards the team. When you talk about covering individuals, is it perhaps easier or harder to cover individuals as opposed to a team?
No, I like getting to know people. You run into this problem, though, and it's been this way with LSU at times, where the coaches impress on the players, don't speak in terms of yourself, speak in terms of the team, and don't glorify yourself. Say things about how much you appreciate your teammates' work. And I understand where the coaches are coming from, but there's also what I want to get to is I want to get to know some of these kids and these college kids. What do they like? What do they think when they're playing? What do they think after they've played a game? How did you feel after making a certain play, or how did you feel after making a certain mistake? And a lot of times the coaches kind of want to control what they say, but the players also kind of learn. I think when they go through the process of 4 or 5 years, they learn what is good. They learn catchphrases, and sometimes that hurts because it doesn't allow you to really get to know the person. I wish they wouldn't use them, but a lot of them talk in those types of phrases. And then I mean, covering a player or covering a team, you always have to deal with that. I've met a lot of great kids and that I've remained acquainted with after their playing days were over. I hear from them. They send me a text every now and then, and I enjoy that. But I like being able to get to know them a little bit better.
Right. And sticking with the balance and fairness within your practice, when you talk about certain things as far as like framing or the portraying at individuals, for those who don't know, framing is the portraying of an aspect of an issue as reality in order to promote certain aspects of society. Framing selects and emphasizes ideas or characteristics that are generally accepted as reality. So when you talk about framing or certain stereotypes that's been used within sports, and you see how sports have changed, do you have to perhaps get away from those stereotypes or be careful when characterizing a certain player in a certain way?
Yes, I think we're all human, and you are at the mercy of your upbringing sometimes. That was what I was saying about educating yourself, not just on the people that you're covering, but just being educated in general and understanding what you just said about avoiding stereotypes, and because we all fall victim to it. I've learned a lot about race through sports from knowing a lot of kids. And I guess you would say some of the stereotypes I held going into it, I no longer hold because of that. And, I'm glad for that. But it is, you have to be aware of it. You have to pay attention. You have to listen. And best of all, I think in general, you have to educate yourself. And I'm 59 years old, and I still don't think I know everything. So I always try to learn more. I always try to get a better understanding just of life in general, so I can do my job.
And you mentioned learning about certain individuals and your upbringing and things like that. And research has shown that prejudices and racial stereotypes can negatively affect the way a child's social interaction and their development. Their attitude towards someone based on their race is determined by messages that they receive. When we talk about race and stereotypes in sports, a stereotype that's generally accepted is that black athletes are athletes due to their physical traits and genetics, and also that white athletes are generally more athletic, more due to their intelligence and other what we would call intangibles. Do you see that as something that's being factual, or do you see that something that's changed, or how do you feel about?
I think we in the business have all gradually changed and look at it differently. Some of these stereotypes come from coaching. You hear coaches say things about people, and some of these stereotypes are dissolved just because of time. Time eventually washes some of this stuff away, because you start to see, like when I was growing up, there weren't that many black athletes that were playing college football. More and more now are going to college, and they're being allowed to play and allowed to go to the bigger schools, and that has something to do with the stereotype, with smashing the stereotype. They're actually seeing that, well, yeah, Warren Moon could, he didn't go to the NFL because they didn't want to let him play quarterback. He went to the CFL, and eventually they figured out, okay, he can play quarterback. He's not just a good athlete. He's a thinking man's quarterback, and I think that helped a lot of people accept it. So I've seen this in numerous instances. It was a long time before LSU had a black quarterback. I think the first one was Carl Otis Trimble. He moved from running back, and he was a very good quarterback. So you learn as you go, and you forget. Sometimes it happens so subtly that you forget when you learn that, or you forget when you finally accept some of this stuff as myth.
You mentioned that with the whole black quarterback within college, a key point that Michael Cobble brought up, because the quarterback is looked at as an intelligent or a smart position, and blacks make up the majority of football players, but whites tend to hold the more visible positions, as such as quarterback, and these are the notable positions deemed as the most important when you talk about critical leadership roles. But a key point that Michael Cobble brought up was the offensive line, because when people think of intelligence, you think of the quarterback, but he mentioned that the offensive line has just as much of a responsibility, specifically being the center, as far as making the calls and having to think on their feet and be as quick as well. And he says you see black offensive linemen as well. So when you talk about specific smart positions, then he says that it depends. But going back to what you said earlier, you think that when it comes to breaking these stereotypes, a lot depends on seeing someone else break the stereotype, as such as a Warren Moon, or we have more current people as such as a Deshaun Watson or a Cam Newton, and more people would believe or would get away from the stereotypes the more they see other people break those stereotypes?
Absolutely. I think you could say the same thing about Barack Obama. I think a lot of white people couldn't imagine a black president, and now that they've seen one, the earth didn't burst into flames because of it. Okay, well, maybe, we can do this again. I'm sorry to digress, but it's all the same thing. There are black offensive linemen, and what happens is they want the offensive linemen don't have to be as fast and quick as a defensive lineman. So they want more quickness on defense, and they want offensive linemen have to be people that they move in a shorter span of time. They have to work as a team. Black or white, it doesn't matter who plays there. I think the more that we've seen this, and the role models that come out and do things. The more you see them talk on television, the more you hear about their lives and what they came from. You talk about whites having the stereotype of succeeding because they're tough. I've seen some really tough black people, do some amazing things just out of sheer grit and desire. And there's also poise. Some people, especially when it comes to quarterback, it's not intelligence as much as it is poise. Deshaun Watson has fantastic poise. He's an incredibly good, and he's able to process information, make a decision in that short amount of time where they have to do it, or the play is blown up. So it's not about. And I've seen white quarterbacks that didn't have any poise at all. So I think these things, the more they happen, the more we understand that what we used to think is no longer valid.
For those of you listening, Deshaun Watson, he was voted as NCAA's top collegiate quarterback last year from Clemson University. He says that he is often stereotyped primarily as a runner because he is black. He says that he is often referred to as a dual-threat quarterback, which is someone who utilizes his athletic and running ability in addition to passing. Watson refers to dual threat as a code word. NFL media analyst and former pro football scout Bucky Brooks says it diminishes their standing as far as how they are viewed as a pro prospect. Guys like Deshaun Watson and some other quarterbacks have to fight against that stereotype to prove to others that they are worthy of being a franchise quarterback. Would you agree to go as far as saying that the stereotype somewhat gives a negative stigma to those black quarterbacks, or do you ultimately believe that the play or the talent will supersede the stereotypes of what people think?
Well, I tend to disagree with Deshaun and Bucky on this. This is why to say dual threat means the guy can run and pass. That's what it means to me. I don't see any stigma there. Dual threat is a compliment. It means you've got more than just one ability. It means You're multi-talented. And I think the reason you see this used with quarterbacks is because there are quarterbacks that can drop back to pass, throw the ball a mile, but they couldn't run out of sight in a week. And they're called drop back quarterbacks. And I think you use dual threat only to separate them. And LSU has had plenty of both. What LSU's got right now, Brandon Harris and Danny Etling, I think they're both dual threat quarterbacks. I don't think either one's a true drop back quarterback. But a drop back quarterback, and like even Tom Brady's kind of a dual threat because he can move around. He's not a great runner, but he can move around. So I don't necessarily, now if it creates a stigma, it's the fault of the people that think automatically that a dual threat quarterback is going to be black. That in that respect, that's wrong. You shouldn't think that way. I know there are dual threat quarterbacks that are white, and there are drop back quarterbacks that can't run. Look at Dak Prescott. Now he's a good example of somebody who they didn't think much of him as a quarterback. He lasted a long time in the draft, and now he's beating out Tony Romo for the job. I considered him a dual threat quarterback. He was a very, very good player, fun to watch, a great kid. I've met him a couple of times. But he could also be viewed as a drop back quarterback. I thought he was big and strong. He can see over the line. And so I think you shouldn't get too caught up in that. A dual threat is kind of a compliment to me. It means you've got more than one ability. And really, running backs, sometimes they'll look at a running back and they'll say, well, he's more of a speed back than he is a power back. Well, that's legitimate because a lot of teams want to have one of each.
You mentioned that an issue is that some people view blacks as only potentially dual threat quarterbacks and only whites as drop back quarterbacks. How do you think we change that? What are some practices, if any? How can we change that, or do you think that more falls on the responsibility of the audience?
Well, that is on the responsibility of the audience. I think that you can look at there are quarterbacks out there that are black that have trouble moving around. They can't evade the rush. They get sacked a lot. They hold the ball too long. I think it's you can't account for what all the audience. The audience is a variety of people that think in a variety of ways. There may always be someone who thinks of a dual threat quarterback as a code word. But I honestly do not. I think it's a compliment that if you're a dual threat quarterback, that means you have more than one ability, and that doesn't mean you're not a good passer. It just means that you're a better runner than a guy. And they call them pro style quarterbacks too. When I say a drop back quarterback, though they're called pro style quarterbacks, it's because you don't want them to, you don't want them to take off running. You want them to find a receiver, and I've seen plenty of guys like that were black.
How has Cam Newton, Deshaun Watson, or any of I guess this has a lot to do with the spread offense, but you've seen more black quarterbacks, and you've seen guys like Cam Newton, or as you mentioned, Dak Prescott, throw the ball really well. How has this changed the way you've perhaps viewed African-American quarterbacks, or how do you think that's changed the sport?
Oh, that changed for me a long time ago, and I never understood why I saw Warren Moon play in college. I never understood why the NFL wouldn't have wanted him. I never understood the NFL felt. I don't know. Maybe they felt like these were quarterbacks that would be impatient and want to take off running when their first receiver was covered. The NFL is a little bit different. They're a check down league. They want their quarterbacks to be smart, not to make mistakes, to check down, and if they can run, that's fine. But you see a lot more of it now. That's why you don't see the wishbone. That's why you don't see. Well, you're seeing it more now. You're seeing more read option in the NFL. To me, Cam Newton is a freak athlete. Okay, he's not a black quarterback. He's just an out of this world, incredibly talented, incredibly gifted quarterback, no matter what race you want to talk about. I mean, there just aren't that many quarterbacks that big, that fast, who can do as many things as he can do. And he's got a great personality. He's set apart from all. Deshaun Watson, I think he can play in the NFL. I would be happy to have him. To me, this has been going on for a long time. I mean, LSU had black quarterbacks in the last century. It's not like it's a new thing, at least to me. And I have seen it change, because there was a time when there weren't.
One thing that may contribute to stereotypes that people acknowledge, or that research has acknowledged, is certain words. So if you have a guy, you might hear certain words, oh, that guy is a beast, or he's a horse, or just using certain words or characteristics similar to animals. Some may believe that it's just innocently characterizing the player, but others believe that using certain characteristics for players, such as that guy's a beast, or he's a horse, or things like that, often trigger those stereotypes, or underlining those stereotypes. How do you feel, or how do you address those situations?
Well, I don't think in every case. I mean, I've heard white football players referred to as a horse. A big, chunky running back is just a big, strong guy. I don't think it has anything to do with race. There are some animal words that are associated that are racist in their association with blacks that I'm not going to say. But when you're talking about football, you're talking about a lot of different types of people, and to me, horse is not offensive, and it shouldn't be offensive. And beast is a word that my kids grew up saying about each other, and just about somebody who's really, really good at what they do, or hard to handle, or whatever. And to me, there's no racial connotation in those words. I don't feel one. I never feel that, and I'm not saying that it's not there, but like I said, there are some words, there are some references that are meant to that can be construed that way, and I really don't even want to say what they are, because I don't like to repeat them. But when you're talking about athletics, you're talking about a very physical game, and these comparisons naturally pop up. Especially when they say he's faster than a racehorse. I mean, you could say that about anybody if they're fast, and it doesn't matter what color their skin is.
But see, then you have guys like I mentioned earlier, Christian McCaffrey, who says oftentimes his athletic ability or his speed isn't brought up, whereas people put more of an emphasis on the intangibles or the toughness, as opposed to his speed or athletic ability, when he says that he is, and it's proven that he's more athletic than his black counterparts. So how do you What about a situation like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't see that. I've heard a lot about Christian McCaffrey. I've heard one of the things he is he's really fast. Well, okay, I accept that. I don't think of him as being that his he's that not a detriment to him that he's fast. He's fast. He's got to be to play college. First of all, you've got to be fast to be a running back in college football. It doesn't matter what color you are. You've got to have some speed. I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about him specifically, but he may get more credit for being smart or tough or determined. Look, I've seen smart, tough, and determined black kids that weren't that fast or were average speed. So I think in our minds, in the public's minds, they may feel that. But, I mean, I don't see it. I've learned, I guess, and it's a mistake. It's definitely a mistake to feel that way or just to assume that. And that's what I'm talking about, educating. You've got to educate yourself.
When you talk about basketball and you talk about blacks being athletic and whites being perhaps more fundamentally sound and being as shooters, it even goes as far as Hispanic players being known as the hard-working, scrappy players oftentimes. Does it change as far as the way you cover basketball, or you approach things the same way?
Same way, and here's the thing. If you've got great athletic ability, and this is something I've learned from coaches, if you've got great athletic ability where you're so good and you dominate, say in high school, just on athletic ability, it's hard to make yourself work on the fundamentals, on blocking out. If you can rebound just by out-leaping people, then you're going to do that naturally. I mean, it's just whatever comes easy to you, you're going to do that. Well, later on, when you move on to the next level, everybody's as good as you athletically. Then you have to start learning those types of things. And sometimes some players can't make themselves or they're not willing to work as hard. But the ones that are willing to work hard and improve their games, they're the ones that end up in the NBA. I mean, you see these wonderful basketball players who don't want to pay the price or don't want to become the player they can be in the NBA because they're not willing to pay the price. And that's a natural human thing. I mean, you can be, intelligence sometimes comes naturally. When you're in elementary school, you read and you understand and you comprehend, and then it starts to get tougher when you get into high school, and it's just the same in athletics as it is in education. And then when you get to college, if you're not willing to do the hard reading and the slow, reading words and learning words that you didn't know before, all those things can slow you down, and it can affect you the same way as not learning the fundamentals in sports. So I think this is something that's pervasive in society and in human nature. It's human nature to want to go take the easiest route to do something, and that's what growing up is, and that's why you see that you see some of these kids. Eventually, the light bulb goes off for them, and they realize, I've got to make myself a better player. I can think of a couple of examples on LSU's team. I didn't think they would still be here, but they finally grew up, and they finally learned to work harder because they couldn't get by on the athletic ability that they got by on in high school.
Right, and when we talk about athletic ability and the presence of certain players, and when you talk about the coverage and the way that certain athletes are covered and the words that are used, in the research that I read, it says that today objective coverage of athletes is arguably more important than ever. African American athletes, once excluded from participating in professional and intercollegiate sports because of institutionalized discrimination, now participate in many sports at a rate that greatly equals or exceeds the representation of the population. When you see that same transition within basketball and football, but not as much perhaps in the media standpoint, how do you think that affects the coverage of the sport?
Oh, you mean like not as many not as much diversity in the
Yes,
media.
not as
Oh,
much diversity
I
within
see it. I wish there were a lot more. I mean, I try to help anybody that comes along that wants to ask me questions. But there is, for one thing, there's not a lot of pay. I mean, it's not a highly sought after type of job. It doesn't require a great deal of education like law school or med school. So there's not a lot of people going into it. I think women have made more of an impact recently than have blacks. But I'd like to see more. I think it would be helpful. There are a lot more now than there used to be when I first got into the business. Probably not nearly enough. And I think, but I think the ones that are there now are speaking out and they're addressing some of these issues. And I think that's a good thing. And I've learned a lot from them. I've learned from some of my colleagues about the way I look at athletes, and I've adjusted it accordingly.
Yes, and it says as the research shows that as the media becomes more racially diverse, the information the audience receives from the media outlets will be generally more accepted. How do you think the lack of diversity has impacted the way that sports are covered? Do you think it's pretty much held sports and media back? Do you think it's hurt relationships? Or how do you think that's impacted sports media up to this point?
I think it has held sports media back. It's made understanding it more difficult, relating to white journalists relating to black athletes. I mean, for some, but I mean, some people don't find that. Some people say that, I have no problem relating to other people, white or black. Sometimes it's the socioeconomic background that the two come from, and it's all about being fair and treating them as people. Really, I don't have a lot in common with some of the kids, but some of them I have a lot in common with. And it's understanding that you shouldn't hold that against them. And there's a lot of reasons why these people are in college and they're getting an opportunity, and you should. I think you should treasure that. But I find we've come a long way. I mean, but there's a long way to go.
Similar to the media, when you talk about perhaps black baseball players or white basketball players, we can stick with black baseball players for now. Why do you think, compared to the NBA or the NFL, why do you think, like Andrew Jones referred to baseball as a white man's sport? So why do you think that the diversity, similarly to the NFL or NBA, hasn't caught up to perhaps Major League Baseball?
Well, one of the reasons is I think black athletes, when they're in high school, they kind of gravitate toward basketball and football because their childhood heroes were those, and they didn't see many in baseball. Plus, baseball, it can be a socioeconomic thing too, and I think, for baseball, it's expensive to play. You can two kids with a basketball and a hoop can play basketball, and you can play by yourself. Baseball is a game you need a lot of people to play.
So socioeconomics, you mean?
Right.
Access in the field, training, camps.
Yes.
Teammates, those sort of things.
Things like that. And you say there's a large number of blacks that live in cities where there's no fields, there's no green space to play a baseball game. It's a lot easier to grab a basketball and shoot hoops. You can do it by yourself. You can do it with one other person. You can get three people in play. Football is a sport where blacks made inroads a long time ago, and that led to schools wanting to play it. And football was a team sport that a lot of kids could play, and they wanted to be athletes. There's a lot of places for them. And, I don't know all the answers to this, but these are the ones this is what I've learned, in my life.
And what do you think can help that diversity for blacks within baseball?
Well, Major League Baseball has put a lot of money into trying to encourage, bringing baseball to the inner cities. But like I said, it's really hard. Baseball is a slow, when you're playing, it's a slow kind of game. I like playing basketball. I like playing football. When I was a kid, I liked playing those a lot more. I like playing baseball, but it got boring. And I think it's just a thing where it's kind of boring sometimes. And kids want to be active, and they want to play something that's a lot of fun. And that's part of baseball's problem. But I don't know how I'm not sure that relates to the race shortage, so I'm not exactly sure how that goes.
When you talk about the dramatic decline of white athletes within basketball, how or why do you think that's changed?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's. I guess part of it is that they gravitate toward baseball and football. Maybe they don't feel comfortable around a lot of black kids. The size and jumping ability and speed and quickness. It doesn't translate for them. I don't really know. I know what I know. I can only tell you what I've seen, and there's a lot more opportunities now, and kids don't spend a lot of time outside, frankly. They stay in and they play video games, and there's just a shortage of people that want to play. But I just think the black athletes that have come up have been better in basketball. They've been better than the white kids.
And just to put that into perspective, black players did not appear in the NBA until 1950. During that season, Chuck Cooper became the first black player to be drafted, while Nat Clifton was the first black player to sign an NBA contract. Fast forward to the 2014-2015 season, 332 out of the total 446 NBA players were African American. That's 74%, while 104 out of the 446 players were white. So this is something that's continued to evolve, whether we talk about race in sports or race within the media. And I think that platforms such as these and these conversations and dialogues help to continue the evolution and the ongoing conversation, because I think it's as simple as a conversation and addressing these issues sometimes, as opposed to it being the elephant in the room. What are some things that you think can continue to propel us as we talk about race and diversity within media and sports?
I think just people educating themselves personally and working a little harder at asking why, and not just accepting that blacks are basketball players and whites are baseball players. You've got to look a little beyond that. You can't just accept things because it's what you've known your whole life. Ask the question why. That's something that I live by. Just keep asking why, and eventually you'll get to the answer. And listen to these people, and listen to people when they talk, and try to imagine, the life they must have led, or what they've gone through, or the prejudices they see every day, and realize that maybe you don't see those. You can't relate to it because it doesn't happen to you. Which I think is one of the biggest mistakes a lot of white people make.
And we're wrapping up here. When you talk about educating yourselves, that's a common theme, and it's obviously would help when answering these dilemmas. What are some ways in which people can educate themselves, whether it's the casual baseball fan or someone who works in media such as yourself, who doesn't see things as balanced that perhaps that you might?
I would say read what black authors write. Try to visualize and understand that blacks come from a different world than you do. I did not grow up in a racially mixed neighborhood or a racially mixed school. Even all through college, I never went to a school that had a great, anything close to a 50-50 mixture. But I have had to learn to let go of some of the things that I held true for a long time that I didn't understand. And you pay attention, especially when an issue comes out. For instance, when Al Campana said that the reason blacks weren't swimmers is because they lacked natural buoyancy. Now, you've got to, if you're a white person, you've got to understand that that was a foolish thing to say, and it's a ridiculous statement. And Al Campana was a very knowledgeable, intelligent man, and a lot of people would hear him say that and say, well, that's Al Campana saying that, so he must be right. Well, no, that was a terrible thing to say. It was ridiculous. And I didn't understand it. I didn't understand how ridiculous it was when I first heard it. But so, yeah, I think that just keeping your ears open and being honest with yourself and listening and educating and and realizing that you don't know everything, and that something that someone on the other side of the issue says may offend you, but ask yourself, why is he saying this? And think about, listen to everything he says, and don't just listen to his message. Listen to the details.
And last question. Well, in 2012, there was research that addressed how racial imbalance potentially affects professional sports by stating that the news media, which is largely comprised of white men in management positions, they place white players atop the marketing agenda. So despite the fact that majority of the players are black, this tactic could lead the audience to believe that white players are perhaps the better players, although it might not necessarily be true. When you talk about a marketing standpoint, or just getting blacks or minorities or perhaps women or anybody in higher up positions, how do you go about that with changing certain marketing narratives?
Well, I think that that has been changing. I think there are a lot of black athletes that have become hugely popular marketing people. Odell Beckham Jr. for one, and I think as we move along, as time moves on, this thing will even out. It'll even out a lot more. But when you're marketing. Marketing is all about reaching target audiences. And if you want to market to white people, you need a white person. I mean, if that's who you're marketing to. But I think they understand now that there's a great big market out there to be reached with black athletes, and I think they're finding that it's a loyal market, and to insert race or to make race a reason for not marketing somebody is bad business, and it always has been, or it always would have been. If we had been fair, and there was a lot of racism in it, I don't think there is now. I think they're learning that a lot of white people will buy an Odell Beckham jersey, and a lot of black people will love Tom Brady.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Jim Kleinpeter, the beat writer for NOLA.com and the Times Picayune. I hope that this contributes to the ongoing discussion within race and diversity within sports and media. Once again, thank you, sir. Any lasting remarks?
No, I appreciate talking about this because I'm very interested in it, and I would like to see a better understanding, and I hope I've helped toward that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.